Howdy, folks, and welcome to Cattle Trails Showcase. This is the May edition of Cattle Trails Showcase. I'm Ron Wilson, Poet Laureate. Mighty glad to be your host. Today, we welcome members and guests of the International Chisholm Trail Association who are participating live. Also, a big howdy to those of you who are watching the recording on YouTube. As is always the case, we invite you to go to the chat function there at the bottom and put in your name and your town. Today, let's put in your name and your town and your favorite horse. If you have a name of a favorite horse, maybe it was a famous horse, a movie horse, TV horse, maybe it was your personal horse, family horse, maybe it was a race horse, maybe, who knows, childhood horse. So anyway, we invite you to go to the chat and enter your name and town and favorite horse. The showcase is brought to you by the International Chisholm Trail Association. Our officers are Dennis Katzenmeyer, President, Vice President Michael Grauer, who's on, Secretary Nancy Lawrence, Treasurer Mary Lou Rivers, and the Western Cattle Trail Association, Michael Grauer, again, is president of that group. The purpose of the Cattle Trails Showcase is to continually highlight the communities, historical elements, museums, and other attractions along the Chisholm or Western Trail. And as you know, we're doing these every second Tuesday at 10 a.m. We're going to go right into our speaker. We're going to go zooming to the Old Cowtown Museum in the historic Delano district of Wichita. Our speaker is Anthony Horsch, who many of you know has been involved with our Chisholm Trail group. He is Director of Education and Interpretation at Old Cowtown Museum. A native of Heston, did some growing up in Pennsylvania, came west and met his wife in Kansas and settled down, been affiliated with Old Cowtown Museum in one way or another for some 25 years. So Director of Education and Interpretation, Anthony Horsch. Anthony, take it away.
Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are so glad to be able to share with you a little bit about our museum, if you're not familiar with us, as well as some of the history of Wichita. I'm going to go ahead and jump right into the screen share. A little bit of housekeeping. You will notice on the bottom of your screen that it says 1 of 67. Do not worry, do not worry. There are 67 slides, but there's a lot of pictures. So, all righty, just to give you a little comfort there. So if you're not familiar with Old Cowtown Museum, we basically cover the history of Wichita from 1865 to 1880. We are 40 buildings on a 26-acre plot. You can see the map in front of you, so we're kind of spread out. We are concentrated on the town life of about 1872 to 76, with the outlying areas giving us the pre-60 and the post-65. So now we do a progression of history through 4 different areas. Our newest area is one that we've just added, which is the Native American. It's always been one of our goals to add the beginning of the story, not just where history was recorded. We also do what was called the Old Town area in Wichita. That was known as more the northern part of the settlement, and we cover that from 65 to 72. The town side is 72 to 1880. I actually focus more on 72 because we've just got the railroad here and we have no brick buildings. Very quickly, they wanted to get rid of these wooden structures that had a tendency to burn. So our town side is developed into 3 different areas. We've got residential area, business district, and an industrial area. And the industrial area is the one that we'll hit on last. And unfortunately, that's our weakest area. So if anyone has a factory they'd like to donate, we would be glad to have it. So last but not least is our DeVore farm, which caps the end of our time period. Now, as many historical things, Old Cowtown Museum started out as a preservation effort to preserve the first stick-built church in Wichita. Marshall Murdoch, who was our newspaper editor in our era, his son saw this building slowly decaying and thought it would be a good thing to salvage. Unfortunately, he was not able to do that before he died. over the years, it had been used by the Catholics and then turned into a boarding house for African-American folks and then a boarding house for folks during World War II factories. But it was slated to be a fire demolition and kind of like riding in on a white horse with $100 in our hands. We'll buy it, we'll buy it. So they saved it. Now we salvaged it. Now what are we going to do with it? Well, here is it in its present location. The city had a plot of land that they were no longer using and didn't intend to use. And so for $1 for 100 years, we got the property to set our buildings on. So that became the beginnings of the museum. Once you say that you're looking for old buildings, lots of people pony up and say, we've got old buildings. So here is the original jail. It was being used as a garden shack, and we brought it to the museum and refurbished it, and that's what it looks like now. The crown jewel of our museum is the Munger House. Darius Munger was part of the Wichita Town and Land Company and one of the real cementing of the town. Mr. Munger sold it to Mr. Woodman, and so he created a very opulent house. Let's go backwards a hair to us now. All right, sold it to this gentleman here who took all the fancy stuff out and had the basics. And by 1940, this is what it's looking like. We got the building donated from the Daughters of the American Revolution, and it is now refurbished on our site. Now, whenever it started out, this was kind of the vision of what the town was going to look like. Just kind of an offshoot of the park. And that was basically what the concept, what the building and the grounds were going to be. In 1953, we opened up our doors to view the different buildings. Unfortunately, it was basically a caretaker who had some keys and would let you in. By 1958, we've acquired a few more buildings and we're becoming more of an official museum. We had a partnership with the Wichita Area Girl Scouts to come and interpret our buildings. Each of them got a script that they read, introducing the building and then forecasting the next building. We had a reunion about 10 years ago, and some of those ladies still remembered their scripts verbatim. So it was quite an exciting thing. So as the centennial of Kansas rolled around, the museum had big ideas. We wanted 125 buildings to create a really representation of the town. Didn't quite make it though, didn't quite make it. In the 1960s, whenever cowboys were all the rage in our culture, we also capitalized on that. Notice we've got the historic Wyatt Earp jail, and notice our time period appropriate cowboys and cowgirls wearing the white hats and the white clothes. So by the end of the 60s into the 70s, we are beginning to focus more on the daily lives of people. And so we've actually become more of a town. This building here is our Lakeside Administration Building, which is this building right here. It is what happens to the Munger House later on. And we thought that would be a fitting skyline. Unfortunately, today we've had so many trees grow around that you can't really see it. But anyways, we'll deal with that. The Girl Scouts changed. I wanted to put this picture in particular because the Girl Scouts changed from their uniforms to prairie dresses, doing a 5-day camp here on the grounds and helping us with our interpretation. Had to put up some laundry to show that they're really doing everyday stuff. Now, our newest area is the Becoming Wichita area. We have a trading post that we're repurposing. Was a farm cabin at one time. Our trading post is meant to service the nomadic Native Americans who frequented the area, the Southern Cheyenne, the Arapaho, Comanche, Kiowa, Apache, as well as the resident Osage and the Wichita. We are very pleased to have the Wichita Intertribal Warrior Society that are the ones that are staffing and doing a lot of the work for us on it. It's been a real good partnership for us so far, and we're very pleased about that. If you're not familiar with the Osages tribe, in prehistory, they lived in the Ohio River Valley. They made their way to Missouri. They had a very good relationship whenever the French, who owned that part of the country, and they became very technological advanced with access to firearms, and they really dominated the area. In fact, they controlled the area from Missouri to Colorado, south into Oklahoma, and north into the northern part of Nebraska. So really, really powerful group. Unfortunately, after the French sold the Louisiana Purchase to the United States, they lost their influence and their benefactor. Suddenly now their traditional enemies became more powerful, and the United States was not very pleased to have a strong military presence on their western frontier. And so they began a campaign to slowly remove their territories and lower their influence. By our time period in the 1860s and 70s, they basically have a reservation on the southern edge of Kansas, and that is where they are. 1871, they depart and make way for the legal recognition of Wichita. The Wichita Indians, if you're not familiar, they're known for their conical grass huts. They lived in our area until the 1750s, when who? Why, the Osages pushed them out. They lived in Oklahoma for a long time. They were chased out of Oklahoma during the Civil War, because they were sympathizers with the Union. And most people are not aware that a lot of the Native Americans were on the side of the South, having come from that particular part of the country. They made their way up north, had to live in temporary dwellings until they got permission to the Osages to move back to the area, which is where their ancestors had lived. So for quite a number of years, we had a very nice Wichita village along our Arkansas River. After the war, they are returned, but as they are here, whenever our town gets founded, we take their name. So I always tell kids that had our town been founded 5 years later, we could have been Smithville or Johnstown or something like that. It's one of those wonderful accidents of history. Now, people that influenced the town itself, Jesse Chisholm, of course, is one of the biggest influence that we have, being the creator of the Chisholm Trail. If you're not familiar, Jesse came to the area in 1836, leading a group of gold miners, because there was gold at the joint of the two rivers. I have met a couple of people since then that have said that actually is true. And one gentleman actually showed me a couple of gold flakes. So whether they came from the river, he wouldn't say. Anyways, Jesse created two trading posts. The one near Twin Lakes was a shopping center here in Wichita, was meant to cater more toward the Osages and to the Wichitas. He was very helpful with the Wichitas whenever they lived in the area. Being known as the Prairie Ambassador, he knew over 14 different languages. He was a very good intercessory and mediator with lots of different tribes in the Oklahoma area. So he was definitely an asset. And in 1867, the first cattle drive comes up the trail that includes part of Jesse's wagon route. James R. Mead is one of our town founders as well. A gentleman who came from Nebraska, did lots of hunting in the northern part of the state. In 1863, he was chased out of the Salina area by some Native Americans that were not too pleased with what he and other people were doing. As the Wichitas are slowly becoming a home here in the Wichita area, his headquarters becomes the headquarters for the Indian agent for the tribe, and he sets up a trading post on the junction of the rivers and does quite a bit of business. He also becomes part of the Wichita Town and Land Company, which is what Mr. Munger is a part of, and he also partnered with Dutch Bill Greifenstein. In 1870, he sold his Towanda holdings and then moved to Wichita after the death of his wife and young son. William Greifenstein, father of Wichita, came to Kansas in 1850. He fled the troubles in Europe in 1848, was accused of being a revolutionary, and he got out of there. Did lots of work with the Native Americans in the Topeka area, and then slowly moved his way down into Oklahoma. In 1867, he had a trading post. Unfortunately, he was forced out of Indian territory. General Sheridan said that he was selling guns and contraband to the Native Americans, gave him 24 hours to leave or be hanged. Well, he disputed that, and in '68, he sued the US government and got $20,000 for his confiscated goods, money that he used for the development of Wichita. So the accidents of history do continue to fall in our favor. He bought a trading post, and that becomes his base of operations while he slowly buys the area south of the Wichita Town and Land Company. Now, the Old Town area has a lot of activity going on. There's freighting, there was a military base, and then we also have hunting that's happening in our area. We also add one more town founder. He's a little bit more than just a footnote. The original Buffalo Bill Mathewson earned his name from hunting buffalo for some of the starving settlers. He also did a lot of freighting and trading in the Native American territory and the Indian territory, and he was elemental in gathering the tribes for the Treaty on the Little Arkansas and the Medicine Lodge Treaty. Hunting and trading. The traders in our area, of course, were definitely dependent on the Native Americans, but that was by design and purpose. They did a little bit different than some folks. They actually took their wagons and went into the camps themselves, which was quite a diplomatic feat, if I remember. The hunting side, yes, buffalo. Whenever I talk to school kids, we talk a lot about animal furs, and it's amazing how today that is quite out of fashion, and some people kind of freak whenever I tell them that people wore buffalo fur. But man, oh man, on a nice winter day, having a buffalo fur coat, you can't beat it. The other thing is the buffalo is being used for leather belting for industry, and the buffalo bones are also being served for fertilizer. The buffalo hunting activity in our area is also contributing to the slow pacification of the Native Americans that are happening throughout the Kansas and Midwest area. I mentioned Durfee's trading post. Greifenstein buys it, but one other thing I wanted to make sure, in 1868, he prints a circular to the drovers to make sure that you stop by on your way to Abilene to purchase supplies. Highlights the fact that we have a military post, but also mentions the name of Wichita 2 years before it actually becomes a town. So that's kind of an interesting foreshadow of what's going to be happening later on. We do have a military base. Eventually, it's called Camp Beecher. It was made to provide settler security from all the marauding Indians. But it was promoted by Governor Crawford of Kansas. Governor Crawford had an interest in the Wichita Town and Land Company, and some people suspect that it was more of a political ploy as opposed to a real need for military protection. By 1869, it's over and done with. I mentioned Darius Munger already, and Darius Munger was part of the Wichita Town and Land Company, a long time creator of towns, started out in New York and made his way west, settling towns as he went. He arrived in 1868 and created this very nice log cabin. You can tell his craftsmanship whenever you come down here. He was sent to build the town, but also to get preemption claims. A lot of people are not aware that Munger built his town on Osage land that wasn't legally theirs. We have a history, a tradition in our country of people moving on to land that isn't officially owned by the government and getting preemption claims because the government is eventually going to catch up. So unfortunately, his small attempt does fail largely because of the unresolved land ownership question. Now, this is what beginning Wichita looks like. So we have Mr. Munger's house, we have Llewellyn's store, we have the Buckhorn Hotel in all of its glory, and we have Durfee's Trading Post. So as I tell the school kids I work with, boy, wouldn't you want to stop and live here? That's a great start for a town. So, Now, we also did a lot of freighting into Indian Territory, and I wanted to highlight particular that there were actually two different ways to get into Indian Territory. Wichita was situated on a military road that went from Fort Harker down into Indian Territory, some to Fort Sill and to Fort Gibson. And so there's a lot of military traffic that's going back and forth, and we often overlook that. We also are following Jesse Chisholm's wagon route on the right-hand side, comes down into Council Grove, not the Kansas Council Grove, goes on to Fort Cobb and over to Edwards Store. And so he's got a good action going back and forth, and that becomes part of the Chisholm Trail. Now, in 1870, we have two town sites that are being joined together. If you can see the dividing line, that is Central Avenue. Munger's Wichita Town and Land Company is on the north, and Greifenstein's settlement is on the south. There's been folklore about a famous horse race as to who can get to the land office in Augusta first, but Greifenstein told all of his benefactors that cooperation would win out over competition, and he was true. Over time, Mr. Greifenstein starts enticing Mr. Munger's settlers to come populate the Douglas area, not terribly friendly about it, but it seems to have had a better effect than going to head-to-head competition. And because of his actions, that is one of the reasons why he's called the father of Wichita. Now, Sedgwick County in 1869 tries to become a county. Unfortunately, there were not enough certified votes to go ahead with that activity. 1870, it does have a successful organization, but the key is that Wichita was selected as the temporary county seat. In our era and our time period, being the county seat is so terribly important. You become the center of commerce and the likely route for any future railroads. In 1870, in April, it becomes the permanent county seat and over Park City, and we will mention them in just a little bit. Wichita is incorporated in July of 1821 of 1870 after the Osages have officially renounced ownership of the land. One of the highlights that they played on in the early days of Cowtown was that Catherine McCarty, mother of Billy the Kid, was one of the signers of the incorporation articles. So just to give you an idea of where we were in 1870, 800 population, 175 buildings, amazing, amazing, amazing. Shoe stores and shoemakers and cabinet shops and billiards and real estate and tannery. And I love this. Too many law offices, two to count. A lot of the lawyers were also house painters because they couldn't often get enough work. So now, Park City, the nemesis of Wichita. In Sedgwick County, we have Newton, Wichita, Sedgwick, and Park City. The Kansas Pacific Railroad is running from Abilene toward Ellsworth, and Park City has agreed that they're going to route the Chisholm Trail to Ellsworth and bypass Wichita. Well, the Sedgwick County passes a railroad bond, $200,000 to support a railroad that comes to the city. Park City, of course, votes it against it because they don't want to go through Wichita. So Park City and Wichita are both recruiting railroads to get us here. Now, I put a little geography map just to help show. I hope my cursor will show up. It's not going to. On the bottom right, we have Wichita. To the left, above that, we have Park City. To the right, we have Sedgwick City, and then Newton is above it. Follow the yellow line up to Abilene, and follow the green line from Park City up to Ellsworth. And so that's the dynamics that we're playing with. Now, whenever the first herd was headed toward Park City, the people of Wichita was greatly alarmed. And we have the 4 horsemen who ride out to meet the herd. We have a marshal, 2 real estate men, and one of the town founders, Mr. Meade. They caught up with them just before sunup and told them that they were going to miss the paradise of the town. And to persuade them, they offered them a handsome consideration. Nonetheless, they turned around, backtracked, and came through Wichita. And by 1876, Park City is no more. In fact, some of its buildings were moved to Wichita to help fill out the town. Now, Wichita has a unique feature in that we are on the Chisholm Trail before we become a railhead. And so thanks to the work of the Chisholm Trail Centennial Committee, we now have a marker by the famous mulberry tree, which is over by the Masonic Lodge, our Masonic home. And that was one of the landmarks that people used as they were heading toward the trail and then moving on toward Abilene. On the northern part of Broadway, way north at the edge of town along the Chisholm Trail, we have a marker that celebrates the Chisholm Trail moving on toward Abilene. And as Wichita becomes a railhead, we also have a marker that is at the Douglas Avenue Bridge, put there quite a while, very, very famous marker. And we also have a sculpture made out of car bumpers, chrome car bumpers. There were two of them up by the Coliseum, and one of them came to Wichita. And so what a fitting place to have it right beside the marker that goes to the Chisholm Trail. Now, Wichita, of course, made lots and lots of preparations to become a railroad. It is hard for us to understand how important it was to be a railhead and to get that railroad. Economic survival and economic prosperity were exactly what they needed. And there were a lot of towns in Kansas that did not survive because they did not have access. And so one of the things that they did was, now the Arkansas River is rather wide and rather shallow, and most of the time it's a very fordable river, but there are times where it's a bit impassable. And so Mr. Greifenstein and others thought that a bridge would be very, very handy. Unfortunately, it's a toll bridge, 5 cents a head for cattle coming. Oh, I don't know. Quite a few drovers went on the river just instead. So now, the other thing was that they advocated and passed a law that made an ordinance that made Douglas Avenue a cattle thoroughfare. So the cattle would come through the center of town. They'd be able to see all the stores and things that were available. The unfortunate thing is they're going to kick up a lot of dust and noise and street refuse. And so a lot of people were not necessarily in favor of it. But in the lower picture, we have Douglas looking to the east. And in the upper picture, we have the present day Douglas, twice as wide as any other road. So the Chisholm Trail folks in Delano have been very active in cementing the Chisholm Trail legacy in Wichita. Just last year, I believe it was just last year, they got sign markers on Douglas to indicate that it is the Chisholm Trail, and we're very, very pleased about that. So, and the end point, well, you got to get to the cattle pens because that's where the railroads are. Unfortunately, the cattle pens are now surrounded by commercial buildings, but we're very pleased to have this particular plaque that indicates what that was, where their goal was. And I wish my cursor was working so I could highlight a few things. On the lower left-hand side, you can see the star with the mulberry tree. You can come right along parallel to the river and head on north following the brown Chisholm Trail heading towards Newton and Abilene. You can follow the Douglas across to some of the cattle pens. There were quite a few in the area servicing the railroads that were here. So now getting a railroad, as I mentioned, was a really, really important deal. In 1871, the Santa Fe Railroad reaches Newton. It's a little bit of a misnomer. As they were surveying, they were going parallel to the Osage Reservation. They were not able to build on the Osage lands because to fund the railroad, they were able to sell the land on either side of the railroad. And with the ownership, not with the government, that was not possible. So they ran parallel with the northern part of the reserve, and they created the little town of Newton, wintering over and hoping that the government would hurry up and act, but they did not. So the county did pass some bonds for building a railroad as opposed to enticing a railroad. And a political deal was made. Imagine that. Newton voted yes, that if you would support us becoming our own county and our county seat, we will go ahead and support your bond measure. And they did. And the Wichita and Southwestern Railroad arrives in Wichita in 1872, just in time for the cattle season. Now, just to give you an indication, numbers are a little hard to come by and kind of fuzzy. Pretty much certain agreement, 1867, the first year out of Abilene, 35,000 head will move in that direction. By 1871, Abilene's not interested in having the cattle so much, so we have them moving to Newton. Newton becomes the wickedest city in the West for 1 year, and they move 40,000 head to the east on the Santa Fe Road. The Wichita and Santa Fe Railroad then becomes the prime mover. We have our best year in 1872 and slowly trickles off. That's the same story for the Kansas Pacific Railroad out of Ellsworth. And by 1875, they're becoming less and less of a fixture and a function in the Wichita economy. So to represent the cattle influence, we do have a cowboy camp. We normally give wagon rides. Right now, our wagon rides are on hiatus as our herd is still on the back pasture, but we hope to eventually bring those up and running again. Now, to help the cowboys enjoy themselves, you need to have services that cowboys who are boys between 14 and 20 that they're interested in. Fortunately, there was this unincorporated area called Delano across the river, and what a great place for all the gambling den and the prostitutes. At least that's what the promotional said. Wichita, of course, had enough prostitutes and brothels and gambling on our side of the river as well, but they made a big fact that Delano is where all of the evil thing happens. The one thing that Delano did have that Wichita did not have was the Amazon races, prostitutes running down to the river to bathe, nothing but the mole on their backs. Cowboys cheers and bet on their favorites. So there you go. That kind of gives a flavor of what they're doing. Now, the conflict for Wichita is vice and respectability, and we highlight that for a couple of different things. We have our own dance group, the Dixie Lee Saloon Girls, and we also have a dance group, the Entre Nous Victorian Dancers. And so periodically, these groups will come out and perform on special events before the virus, and hopefully after the virus. We'll have these folks out on the same weekend so we can help contrast that. Now, from the beginning, vice was not a popular thing. The Presbyterians were very big advocates of reform and were very, very active. And there was a good reason. They went to New York to get funding for their church, and they were told no because there were too much sin in Wichita. And so they needed to clean up their act. 1873, the Methodists have an anti-vice rally, and I love this. Evil came upon men because of their disregard of the principles of right, and no city stands too much wickedness any more than a bridge can hold the weight of too many cattle. So there you go. Wichita also becomes the center for the temperance movement here in our part of the world. One of the strongest movements was the Murphy movement, the Blue Ribbon Army. His motto was, with malice toward none and charity toward all. Very charismatic leader, was very active in the area, and also helped the Prohibition in 1880 convention get going, but wasn't necessarily owned by all. Some of the anti-temperance folks created the Red Ribbon Army that wore red ribbons through town. And so you could kind of look through town and see kind of a colorful display as you're going along. So now, just to give you a feel for the impact that the railroad had, just to look at the population, looking at the census numbers. First census in 70, 689. Second in 75, 2,703. And the third census, 4,911. So we have a real explosion of population. The other thing the railroad, oh, there you go. There's a visual image of how we are actually growing. And it's hard to imagine that 1873 artist rendition is a very, 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 very minute part of Wichita today. So the railroads also brought lots of different kinds of people. Lots of immigrants, Germans in particular, also brought lots of settlers. We had a lot of people coming from Illinois and Iowa and Ohio, a lot of farmers. Raised the standard of living. Oh, you betcha. Gave us a lot of diverse business as it came. On the right, we have the Santa Fe poster that's pretty famous. Most people don't notice on the bottom, there is a little notice about Santa Fe being a recruiter of German folks. And so that's a pretty well-known piece. So the other thing that the railroad brought was the Victorian internet, otherwise known as the telegraph. Messages at lightning speed. It is simply amazing that you could send a message from here in Wichita, get it up to Kansas City in less than 10 minutes and get a response in about the same amount of time. So if you're a farmer and you break your plow and you need one from Kansas City, you can send a message in the morning. They can overnight it to Wichita and get it here very, very quickly. It also created the possibility of lots of business deals and money transfers. There were lots of keys and codes that people were using. And a lot of people are not aware, but there was lots of social media, especially among the telegraphers. And there were a number of romances with marriage ceremonies. The most famous one being a lady in California and her gentleman, I believe it was in Missouri. So a lot of activity. Oh, law enforcement. I couldn't find it this morning, but there's a story about a gentleman who was riding a bicycle that I believe he held up some people in Winfield, and they sent a message by telegraph to our Kansas City or Ark City, and he was apprehended because they saw him coming. So will wonders never cease. Now, to represent some of the cosmopolitan nature, we do have a blacksmith shop, which is kind of the industry, but we also have a baseball team that performs about every third weekend or so that helps us show the variety of Victorian era. 1876 to 1880 is the end of our time period. We have our Devore farm, our most hands-on part of the museum. By 72, we have barbed wire being brought into the Wichita area. Unfortunately, the cowboys did not always keep track of their cattle, and sometimes they actually cut the wire. It's kind of ironic for a lot of people that wire was actually meant to keep people or keep animals out of fields as opposed to in, but we sold an awful lot of barbed wire in the general stores in Wichita. But the other big deal was that by 1875, the advocates for reform and a lot of the people in town are advocating that the quarantine line be moved to the western edge of Sedgwick County from the eastern edge of Sedgwick County. And there's that red line, no Texas cattle, the end of tick fever, and now we have unfettered agriculture boom. Oh, we still had to get over a little bit of the PR problem. If you're not aware, Kansas was once part of the Great American Desert. In 1819, and Stephen Long came through and declared it the worst place for man or beast, only fit for animals. And so this was a PR campaign that Kansas put out to convince people that we were not a droughting state. And then just to show you how well things are going, Harvest Day in Wichita, to one of the grain elevators here in Wichita. We had 6 of them, so we are a booming agricultural area. By 1880, we have factories galore, wagons, carriages, plows, brooms, biscuits. Oh, back up. Wichita was the broom capital of the Midwest for a number of years, right around the turn of the century. So we are really a booming part of the economy. And unfortunately, this is the part that we really need more of it. Right now, we are in the process of fundraising for a carriage annex that would have been basically a showroom for a carriage factory. We have some of the pieces of a factory, but as of yet don't have that in process. And if anybody has a factory from the 1870s they'd like to donate, we would be glad to have it. So now here we are heading toward the west. We are a museum that has a couple of really interesting features. As you can see, the admission prices, but we have a benefactor in town that has given us free Sundays. He has compensated us for the loss of revenue, and our free Sundays have become very popular. In fact, I am so pleased because the demographics that we have coming through are just amazing. A lot of people can't afford the $9. And I go to Goodwill and places like that on a regular basis, dressed in costume. And I'm amazed of the number of people that come up and thank us for having free Sundays because they're able to come and bring the kids out. So just a really great thing that we're really grateful for. So we are closed on Mondays, open Tuesday through Saturday, 10 to 5, and Sunday from noon to 5. And so there we go. That is a little bit about Wichita and Old Cowtown Museum. So I would be happy to entertain questions and listen to comments and things that you have. I'm very enthusiastic about the museum and about our town. There's no other museum that I'm aware of that covers this much history in such a short time span. Cowboys, buffalo hunters, freighters, soldiers, dance hall girls, farmers, industry. Man, it's just amazing what we can talk about. So anyways, I will be quiet and ask if you've got any questions or comments, feel free to offer.
Thank you, Anthony. It is amazing. As a former Wichita resident, I'm flabbergasted at how much I learned just from this presentation today. There are a couple of questions. One is, are the slides available? And we can see about what Anthony says about that. We will be recording this to YouTube, and posting it to YouTube. So the whole presentation will be available there. If you're interested in the slides specifically, you can ask Anthony, contact Anthony. There was also a question, like many museums, there have been ups and downs Old Cowtown has been through. And one question that's posed is, at one point there was talk of Old Cowtown closing down. Where does that stand? Has that been put to rest?
Until 2008, the museum was operated by the nonprofit organization that basically founded the museum. Built on city land, all of the buildings and such are owned by the city, but they got into some financial difficulty. And at that point, we were funded nominally by the city, but a lot more by the county. The city took a large interest in our heritage and took over financial management of the museum. And so in the time that I've been at the museum, I've been a corporate employee, I've been a county employee, and now I'm a city employee. So I do believe that we are now on a more solid footing. We are underneath a department here in Wichita. And so I don't foresee any dark clouds ahead. Like the rest of the economy, we are funded, or should say by the rest of government, we are funded by tax dollars. And because of the economic slowdown, we've had to curtail some things, but as things are starting to pick up again, I'm anticipating that that'll pick up again though. We still have a very worthwhile museum to come out and look at. We don't have quite as many things as we had before, but I think we still have a worthwhile events. Cowboy camp. We have opened the cowboy camp up. It's interesting. We'll see what happens now that the mask mandate is under review by the city. I just got an email before I popped over here. So we do have our cowboy camp set up. The activities that we normally have, the branding and the roping and stuff like that, we've curtailed, but I'm anticipating that we will have that pop up in just a little bit. Annual events, oh golly, we've got a large number of events that are coming up. We have a number of events that are non-time period to kind of broaden our base. In 2 weeks, we've got steampunk. This weekend, we've got Little House on the Prairie. In July, we have a 4th of July celebration. We have a Day of the Cowboy that's right around the National Day of the Cowboy. We have Sedgwick County Fair that's been going for many, many years. We also have Christmas, old fashioned, or a glimpse of Christmas. Oh, goodness. Sorry, the Christmas event has gone through several name changes. So a Victorian Christmas is what it now is. So we anticipate that'll be up and full-fledged again. So if you check out our website, just type in on Google Old Cowtown Museum, and you can find a list of our events there. So
outstanding. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you so much. How about a virtual round of applause for Anthony and the folks at Old Cowtown. We appreciate what you've done, and thank you for sharing. This is our May Cattle Trails Showcase. Let's talk about our speaker for next month, and I'll call on Lonnie Steben, who is the chair of the Kansas chapter of the International Chisholm Trail Association and chair of our Cattle Trails Showcase Committee. Lonnie.
Thank you, Ron. Hey, before I talk about next month, I see Bruce is on here, and I want to give an apology. We had sent a reminder about all the links, and when we were kind of reminder about the Caldwell Festival, and I inadvertently missed Bruce's presentation, which was the second session, and we will get a link out. And in the busyness of this week, Nancy and my emails crossed, and the invitation came out about an hour before I got the reminder to Nancy. So Bruce, we're if you're interested as the viewers, and we want to make sure and share this amongst everybody with the whole group, that just it's ICTA on YouTube, ICTA Cattle Trails Showcase, and they're listed in order of the link. And so if you want to view any of the previous programs, that's the easiest way to see them. But Bruce, we'll get that out here at some point this next week, and we sure don't want to miss your presentation because it was a great one. Next month, we will be joined by Jim and Gloria Austin, and they're founders of the National Multicultural Western Heritage Museum in Fort Worth, Texas, and which acknowledges the contributions of the Hispanic, Native, European, Asian, and African descent. And the museum was originally named the National Cowboys of Color Museum, and it's since been renamed as the Natural Multicultural Western Heritage Museum in Fort Worth. And the exhibits cover highlighting buffalo soldiers, the Native American chiefs, and then also the vaqueros. So we look forward to another great presentation next month. Ron, that's it for my end.
Thank you very much, Lonnie. Thanks to everybody for joining us. So make sure you join us next month, Friday, June 11 at 10 a.m. for a Cattle Trails Showcase. Be with us again. Join the International Chisholm Trail Association and Western Cattle Trail Association. We'd love to have you join us. For now, to close our program, this is Ron Wilson, Poet Laureate, saying thanks for taking time to join us in this place, and come on back next month for our Cattle Trails Showcase. Happy trails, everybody.
Thank you very much. Nice presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.